Hi, I'm Laura McCullough with Brookdale's Visiting Writers Series, and we have Andre Dubus III with us today. I met Andre at the Pine Manor Summer Solstice Conference this past summer. I didn't really know his work yet. The students in his workshop were buzz at meal times. They were very rocked by Dubus's easy charm and laid-back manner, in combination with a fierce loyalty to story and its machinations, the rigors of craft and of language. I was there working on poetry, but I paid close attention to what his students had to say. He clearly challenged them to rise above their habits and to approach their stories and their writing styles with integrity and, above all, a kind of ruthlessness. He's clearly attached to fresh language. But he is a very, very charming writer, and I think that you'll enjoy our talk with him today. He is the son of a famous writer and a cousin to another, but Andre Dubus III managed to avoid the writing life for a while, until he lit up the literary world with his 1999 National Book Award finalist novel, House of Sand and Fog, which became a visual tour de force in the 2003 film of the same name. His other books include the 1993 novel Bluesman, and before that, the masterful and dark collection, The Cage Keeper and Other Stories. Dubus has won numerous awards for his work, including a Pushcart Prize, a National Magazine Award for Fiction, a Guggenheim. He was one of 3 finalists for the 1994 Prix de Rome, given by the American Academy of Arts and Letters. House of Sand and Fog was a New York Times #1 bestseller. He teaches at the University of Massachusetts at Lowell and other universities and writing conferences. And I've just gotten to see a preview copy of The Garden of Last Days, which will be out this summer, which is quite a hefty book. Clearly is going to be a fabulous read, and I'm looking forward to it. We're glad you're here, Andre. How are you?
I'm glad to be here. Thank you. I'm well. How are you?
Well, good. Glad to be doing this. Now, some of our audience will know you, and some of them won't. I'd like to start by asking you a little bit about your life. You come from a literary heritage, but you still came to writing in a circuitous manner. People like to talk about all the different jobs you've had. How do you feel about this looking back, and how would you characterize your writing life now?
Well, I kind of stumbled into writing, excuse me, even though my father was the great short story master, Andre Dubus, as you know, like a lot of kids, I don't know what my father did, I didn't care. Who cares what Dad does? I read his work for the first time when I was 15, completely captivated me, and I was reading a lot then. To answer your question, how to get into it, I actually fell in love with a girl. I went to college. I got a degree in sociology and political science. Went to the University of Texas at Austin.
And you were actually working on a doctorate at some point.
Yeah, I was heading to graduate school to get a doctorate, and but then I started to date a girl who was in a fiction writing class, and she had a crush on one of the writers, and I was so jealous. Joe this, Joe. She was always talking about Joe, and I was reading Marxist theory and stuff. And so one day I read one of Joe's stories. Was lying on her bed, 4-page manuscript, prepared to hate it because I hated Joe. And it was a lovely tale about a little boy. A boy working in a diner, treating 2 prostitutes come in. They're treated cruelly, and it ends with him just mopping the floor at 3 in the morning in the neon light, thinking this isn't right. And I had a crush on Joe by the time I was done reading that, and more importantly for me, I didn't know at the time, but I felt inspired to try to write a scene, and that's what started it.
That's a story that you must have read 20 years ago, and yet you remembered it in a great deal of detail and almost lovingly relate it to us. That's astounding. Your father passed away in 1999. The Cage Keeper came out in '89, and that meant that there was at least a 10 to 15-year period where you were both publishing at the same time. What was that like?
Well, I truly believe it's an incredible privilege to publish your work. There are so many wonderful writers out there who do not get that joy, and it's just really hard to do. And so, first of all, I think it's a privilege. I'm grateful for it. To be published with my father, though, was problematic in my 20s because we have the same name.
Right.
And I remember
still do a lot of confusion.
Yeah, and it's understandable. I mean, Hank Williams Sr., Hank Williams Jr., I don't know, people understand now, but it was hard because in my 20s, it wasn't about career. I didn't care about my writing career. I cared deeply about writing, if that makes any sense.
Oh, absolutely.
The career is a whole other thing I don't think a lot about. And it was more so in my 20s. And at that time in my life, I really needed, like every young person, to separate from my parents. And, you know, the irony is I hadn't even lived with my dad after age 9 or 10. And here I was joined to him at the hip in this suffocating way. However, as I've gotten older and as I've become a father myself, and certainly after I've lost him, I'm just proud as hell to have his name, and hope to treat it well, to treat the name well, and not sully it in any way. And I'm really proud of who my father was.
Just to take that one step further, I read in an interview that someone did with you where they asked, what are you going to say if one of your children wants to be a writer? And I thought you handled that.
What did I say, Laura?
Oh, I'm not going to tell you. Let's ask it fresh. What are you feeling today about this? What if one of your children wants to be a writer?
Well, honestly, I'd be happy for my child, because I think that if in this moral court we're all in, if you can find something that makes you feel you're living an authentic existence, then your life is richer and far more joyous than it would ever be.
Well, your wife/partner is a dancer.
She's a dancer.
So there's multiple creative things going on in your household. So, I'm saying writer, but really, if any of your children chose to do something that wasn't, no offense to anybody, clearly going to make them a ton of money.
Or any money.
Or any money. But if they found something that was a creative outlet for them, you'd feel good about it.
I'd feel really good. I really do believe that it's, I don't know, man. I mean, that's what, what's his name? Joseph Campbell talked about in Following Your Bliss.
Follow your bliss.
That thing that makes you feel you. And when you do that, you are more authentically you than when you don't. Many people live this entire life without finding that, and I think it's a real sad thing. And it's a joyous thing if a kid finds that he wants to write poetry, and he's just so alive when he's writing poetry, whether he's broke or not. So I'd be happy for my child, although I tell him to go get a job, find a way to work 2 jobs.
Find a way to work 2 jobs, which he or she would have to do anyway.
Yeah.
You mentioned Joseph Campbell, which makes me wonder who some of your other influences are. People I'm sure immediately talk about your dad, but who do you think your ancestors are, your progenitors are? Who do you hold inside as a shoulder you're climbing on, besides Pop?
That's a really good question. I actually don't consider my father an influence artistically at all. I love his writing, but I don't reach for it the way I do for other writers. I would say, honestly, it's got to be music. It's got to be Bruce Springsteen and Tom Waits and Bob Dylan. It's got to be singer-songwriters who write compassionately and honestly about human beings that I recognize in my life. And, moving away from music, Howard Zinn, I just realized a few months ago, I read, People's History of the United States when I was in my early 20s, and it didn't show me a new vision, it articulated a vision I'd had.
Someone else was actually saying what you saw.
Yeah.
And it makes sense given what you were studying at the time.
Right.
Given Bluesman and Cage Keeper and other stories, class is definitely one of the issues. It certainly is in House and Sand and Fog too, but we'll hold House and Sand and Fog off for a little bit. Certainly in those earlier works, class was a big issue. Were you conscious of that?
No. I don't think I was conscious, Laura, about class. My father, his father was a civil engineer. My mom comes from mule skinners and carpenters and pipe fitters down in Louisiana, and there are a lot of blue collar people in my family. Those are the kind of people I grew up around, but I don't think about that much. I really, you and I have talked about this before, but I do think the creative writing process is deeply mysterious and quite divine, actually, and I don't mean to overstate that. It's really my religion. I really believe in the power of creativity and imagination. Everybody gets one, not just writers and poets and people like that. Everybody gets one, and I think to answer honestly, I don't know. I do believe in intuition, and if you look at the Greek, or I forget, maybe the Latin root of intuition, it actually means to guard. And I think that's a part of you that you're working with when you're writing or composing. And my wife's a choreographer, and it's the same thing. She feels that over here is a little too crowded, and she has to lighten it up. And I think there are larger forces at work, and I find it so beautiful.
When Robert Owen Butler was here a few years ago, and we were talking, he had just come out with his book, From Where We Dream. Book of essays on writing. A similar idea of we're writing from the same place that we are dreaming, that we're manifesting something from, but not from our consciousness.
Exactly. Which is why I find in writing classes that I teach that I'm always advising my students. They can do whatever they want, but I advise them working with me, try this. Try not outlining your story. Try not thinking about it. Try not talking about it. You know, I really do believe, whether you're a male or female writer, that when you're writing, you're pregnant with that story. And the cells are multiplying and dividing inside you just the way a baby does in a woman's womb. And you kind of want to keep it dark and mysterious, and you want to attend to it daily. And I think if you do that, I found over the years, you'll end up giving birth to something you never could have foreseen. And it's going to surprise you.
So sort of like tending a fertility, an imaginative fertility.
Exactly. And just showing up. I think in a lot of ways, athletes talk about being in the zone. I see such a parallel between the arts and athletics. The only sport I've ever done is boxing, but and instead of thinking I'm gonna throw a left jab, a quick straight right, a double left hook, a right uppercut, and another left hook. There's no way I could think that and then have it work. I'd get flattened. But if I'm in the moment with the guy across from me, and then something happens, and I think that's what it's all about. It's about cooperating with what this thing is.
Well, my only concern, or what I'd offer back is, that's when the craft can be transparent, when it's been assimilated enough that you're not thinking about how do I, in basketball, how would I, do a layup, or how am I playing guitar. But so many students think writing is different from boxing, from guitar playing. They don't need to practice. They don't need to hone those skills. They can just sit down and...
Well, I'm glad you brought that up. I also believe that the core of writing is rewriting. So yeah, I'm glad you're stopping me here, because it would sound as if I'm just saying, just let it gush. No, no. I like what the writer Paul Ingalls said. He said, writing is rewriting what you've already rewritten. But look at the word to revise. It means to see again. So
to revision.
Yeah, to revision. So you write this scene, or these 3 or 4 scenes, and for some reason you just don't buy scene number 2 when she goes into the convenience store. You don't buy it. So, all right, rewrite it. What does she really do? And I think that's where, and then, so you're cooperating with the truth of it, and when that happens, then the zone shows up.
But
you got to
on
work
that
for it.
note, we're going to take a little break. I'm Laura McCullough. This is Andre Dubus III. This is the Visiting Writers Series. Please come back for the second half of the show.
It's never too early to start reading to your kids.
Are you prepared for what awaits you?
There are amazing possibilities when you open a child's mind to reading. Log on to the Library of Congress website and let the journey begin.
Family and friends can provide the support you need to reduce your risk of cancer, diabetes, heart disease, and stroke. Eat right and get active.
Once they've outgrown their toddler seat, they're still not ready for adult safety belts alone. 4'9" is the magic number. Until then, kids need a booster seat. Make sure your little pumpkin gets there safely. Visit boosterseat.gov.
Hi, I'm Laura McCullough. This is Brookdale's Visiting Writers Series. I'm talking with the fiction writer Andre Dubus III today. Actually, we're cutting it up on the stage here. I'd like to ask you about House and Sand and Fog. What was it like discovering those characters? They were quite well-rounded, with lots of faults and also lots of sympathetic aspects too. How did you find them? How did they discover you, and how did you channel them?
Wow, there's a lot to say. I can tell you I just show up daily, and I try to put myself in an open, receptive state of being where I just sort of try to receive something. You know, Flannery O'Connor in her wonderful essay, The Nature and Aim of Fiction, which every fiction writer should read. I know you know it well. Every line is quotable, but one of the things she says is that there's a certain grain of stupidity the writer can hardly do without, and that is the quality of having to stare. And I think she's right on the money. You know, Margaret Atwood said that, she said, contrary to what a lot of people think, writers don't know more than anybody else. She said, I think we know less, and we're kind of slow on the take, so we have to keep asking. So she left them and went to Home Depot? What'd you go to Home Depot for? We can't get the Home Depot scene out of our minds. So what fuels me always is curiosity, and the projects that excite me the most are the ones I tend to know the least about. And so yeah, some bad things happen in that story, and they're flawed and they're fallible, but you know, so's everybody I know, and that's what I discovered.
You know, to follow up on what you just said about Atwood and Connor, the epigraph to the novel is from The Balcony by Octavio Paz. Beyond myself somewhere, I wait for my arrival. I'd like to ask why you used that epigraph, and if you could talk a little bit about any accusations of appropriation or alterity. You know, having this Iranian colonel was very different from your own life, and how you came to understand him.
Well, with The Balcony, I had read that poem by Paz and loved it, and again, as we were saying earlier, it was just a very intuitive thing. Something rippled inside my psyche that said, this has to do with what I'm working on with this novel, House, Sand, and Fog. I think it has to do, one of the things I notice about these characters is none of them are grounded in a powerful way in themselves. The colonel is pining for the power he once had and the status he's lost. Kathy is the black sheep in her family, and the last thing she's going to do is lose her father's house. At all costs, she won't do it. Lester Burden is, you know, drunk and horny and aroused with a gun. I mean, he's a mess. And what was your second question? Because I want to answer that.
About appropriation and alterity.
That's an important
and
point. Thank you. See, here's the whole thing. Appropriation is a writer's job. And I wouldn't even call it appropriation. I love an essay that Rosellen Brown wrote years ago about this, when this whole political correctness thing was even a stronger and more widely used term on campuses. Let's get this straight. The rage against, for instance, a white man writing from the point of view of a Puerto Rican girl is, or even more to the point, a Sioux Indian, is absolutely justifiable because it has to do with genocide and mass murder and rape and pillage and plunder. The rage is right on the money. Who are you to massacre us and now you're taking our stories? I understand the rage. However, it's misguided. The job of the writer is to imagine the private lives of others, no matter who they are, no matter what stripe, gender, ethnic, or otherwise the writer is. But I love what Rosellen Brown said. She said, therefore, contrary to it being an act of colonialism, it's really an act of friendship. It's a sustained act of empathy. Where she's saying, I am asking, what's it like to be you? Now, the danger is the writer falls flat on his or her face and gets it all wrong. And that's the only danger he or she should face. It should be just artistic. We are in a wonderfully free culture in that sense, that we are allowed to write whatever we want without being imprisoned or shot for the most part.
You know, the poet Tony Hoagland, and I understand you are a secret poet liker.
That's all I read, baby.
Really?
No, I read more poetry than anything.
Clearly you read lots and lots of stuff. You read widely. But he's been taking a lot of heat for trying to write about race in America as a white man. But you use the word empathy, and that seems to me to be a really key issue. What is it about empathy that you think applies to this storytelling?
I think that the kind of stuff that Laura, I know that you write and that I try to write is this character-driven literature, hopefully literature, character-driven stories where it's about real three-dimensional human beings. Well, in order to become these people, you have to be in a state of curiosity. Faulkner said late in his life he thought that's the only thing the writer needed, even above talent. He said it was curiosity. His exact phrase was insight, to mull and to muse why it is that man does what he does, and if you have that, then talent doesn't make much difference whether you've got it or not. I couldn't agree more with the great Faulkner. And here's what I believe. I have to quote O'Connor again, though. She said a writer's beliefs are not what she sees, but the light by which she sees. So you want to learn something about what you think about something? Write a story, write a poem, write a letter to your mother. You're going to find something out about what's inside you that you did not know was there previously. So it's all about questioning the existence of the other. I frankly
The human
don't,
experience.
I don't believe in the other, Laura. I don't believe the other exists. I don't feel above anyone. I don't feel beneath anyone. I don't feel any distinctions. I know men and women are different. I know whites are privileged in our culture. I know all this. I know that. But I think on a spiritual level, these are invisible boundaries. And I keep finding that the more I write these things.
So I want to make it a little bit more personal.
All right.
As people living our lives, paying our mortgages, teaching our students, raising our children, we have to be pretty centered and, keep our lives together. What is it like privately really living inside the minds of people like the characters in House of Sand and Fog, whose lives are terribly disorganized and crumbling? What's it like being in that state, having to really confront them empathetically?
That's a great question. I've never been asked that. Honestly, I am able to leave a lot of it behind at the desk, although sometimes I'll find if I'm working on a particularly painful passage in a story, I'll find I'm in a funk or I'm more anxious, or, in House of Sand and Fog, there's a very dangerous part of the story with a child. And, my wife and I are blessed with 3 kids, and I didn't even want that book in the house with them. I didn't want that manuscript even in the house with my babies. And I feel like apologizing to everyone who reads it, by the way. I want to give them a hug, a massage. I'm sorry. I know it's painful. And I've always hated when writers say this, but I'm going to say it because it sounds so pretentious. But I do think that if you allow the thing to go where it wants to, it actually wants to go places that are apart from what the writer wants.
Absolutely.
That it actually takes on a life of its own that's really quite invigorating and bizarre and mysterious.
Well, while you're talking about that, because we only have so much time, can you move into the new work, the book that's going to come out, and talk a little bit about that discovery process, what we can expect?
This new novel, The Garden of Lost Days, for me, and this is true, I know of a lot of writers, it came from an image that I couldn't shake in my head, and that was after September 11th, I had no desire to write about September 11th. I was reeling from it like everyone else, but I just kept seeing cash on a bureau. I kept seeing cash on a bureau, a wad of cash on a bureau. And I realized it came from what I read about these guys, these extremist guys who did the terrible things they did, sacrificing themselves in the process, yet they went to strip clubs, some of them. And so I began to imagine, well, what's it like to have been a woman who danced for one of these guys? And after the smoke clears, you realized you actually got naked for one of these guys who did this terrible thing. And that is the image that gave birth to the whole book. It takes place on the Gulf Coast of Florida just a few days before 9/11 and then after. And one of the main characters, much to my shock and dismay, became one of the young Saudi men. And this is the scariest thing I've ever written. And
What do you mean by scary?
I didn't want to be this guy. I resisted. I resisted him coming in as a character. I said, no, you're going to just have a little tableau in a VIP room and that's it. And 2 or 3 years into the writing of the story hit some climax, and it felt like a fake climax. It felt as if, or not the real one. And the novel kept pulling me towards this young Saudi. And I resist him because of a number of reasons, but the main reason being I knew I would have to suspend judgment to be him. Hemingway had a great line. He said, the job of the writer is not to judge, but to seek to understand. Every day when I go to campus where I teach at University of Massachusetts, I pass by one of the houses of one of the guys on that first plane. A lot of people from where I live north of Boston were on those planes. And I see his widow, and I see the child he never met, she was pregnant with. And as I drive by, I say a prayer and I beg their forgiveness because there was a feeling of I had to be this guy. And so I didn't judge him when I was him. But I want to make a very important distinction, and I think it's true in life anyway. I do not sympathize with this guy at all, but I had to empathize with him, right? I had to become him and walk in his shoes. And so that's where this new novel goes.
Well, we live in a community that will really be interested in this story. Monmouth County was the hardest hit county in New Jersey for deaths in
Lord.
9/11. This was a pretty amazing thing for this community. I'm sure it's going to be a searing story, fierce, and we're grateful that you've tried to grapple with this.
I do think, I never feel confident about what I've written. I love what Samuel Beckett said. He said, ever tried, ever failed, never mind, try again. Fail better, fail better. So there's always that lingering feeling, but I'll tell you one thing. If you don't know who these people are and why they did what they did, I do think you'll get a much better idea by reading this guy.
Well, I'm looking forward to it. We only have a little bit of time left. I want to ask you one question.
Yeah.
You mentioned Bruce Springsteen before. We are in Bruce Springsteen land.
That's what I've heard.
Tell me about your fandom. What do you like? Have you heard the Magic?
Yeah,
Radio Nowhere?
I've got all his albums. I've been listening to him since the early 70s, and only I think later, only now that I've gotten older, I've got kids, and I have enough distance on my teenage years, do I realize that I think that what speaks to me about his work is this, first, this real blue-collar, backstreet kind of feeling, but it's really this compassion for those who will never be anybody anyone's going to know. Compassion for people who are never going to be known except by those they work with at their job and their family and their uncle or their wife or their kids. And
that empathy again. You like?
Yeah, I'm a sucker for that. Yeah, and those are the kind of books I like to read too. Those are the kind of writers I like to read.
Well, we are glad that you're here. We're looking forward to your reading tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for talking to us, and I am very excited about The Garden of Last Days, and we'll be looking forward to reading it. Hope you all do too. Thank you for listening in with us. This is the Visiting Writer Series. I'm Laura McCullough. This was Andre Dubus III. We'll see you again. Thanks.
April drove north on Washington Boulevard in the late afternoon heat. She passed housing developments behind acacia and cedar trees, Spanish moss hanging from their limbs like strings of dead spiders. Between her legs was the black coffee she bought at the Mobil station on the way out of town, and it was too hot to drink, the sun still shining bright over the Gulf and blinding her from the side like something she should have seen coming. Like Jean getting laid up, and now there's no one to watch Franny, and no calling in sick at the Puma. And little Franny was strapped in her car seat in the back.